writer who could manage money was rare, because anyone who was adept at it would also have enough common sense to pick a better livelihood. As Paul began to dress with care, he glanced in the tiny mirror over the dresser. Shaggy brows and bright, friendly blue eyes glared back at him. He ran his hand over the well-trimmed Van Dyke beard as he gravely scrutinized the large Jewish nose that revealed his true heritage. Even though Paul was Polish, his mother had been Jewish, something he was deeply proud of. Even as he glanced in the mirror, old memories that he tried to keep buried began to awaken. The day in Germany when his father had welcomed his mother's parents to their house, he had made him move across the street to his uncle's home under the pretext that his grandparents needed his room. At the time, Paul didn't understand it, being just 12 years old, but he felt something was wrong. In the past, whenever his grandparents came to visit, they had always stayed in the guest room, never needing Paul's bedroom. But on this occasion, Paul was told to move and not to come across the street until one of his parents came over after him. 1938, the year that Paul saw the German soldiers come and put the yellow Star of David on the front door. It wasn't until much later that Paul realized that his father could have escaped the madness that came their way, but he had stayed right beside his wife. Paul never found out what really happened to his parents and grandparents, but he liked to believe that his father was allowed to stay beside the woman he loved until the very last moment. It was a romantic thought, but one that he cherished deeply. The day after the truck came and took his parents and grandparents, Paul's uncle made the necessary arrangements, and before Paul knew what was happening, he found himself in Paris. Until he was 18, Paul spent his years in boarding schools. His uncle had died before the end of the war, so Paul was left on his own rather early in life. The little bit of money that came out of Germany to him was spent on his education. Before his college days were over, Paul had had to find a job to help finish his education. "Now," he said grimly into the mirror, "you Jewish Polak bastard, let's get on uptown and overwhelm these cocksuckers with your grand nobility." Paul slipped on his suit coat, took one more glance in the mirror, then brushed off some imaginary dust from the lapel of the dark sport coat. He adjusted the black tie he had put on for the occasion and made ready to depart. One quick glance down at his shoes made him hesitate. He took a quick look at his watch, then hurried over to the dresser and searched around under the shirts and shorts until he found an old T-shirt. He examined the shirt carefully before deciding to use it to wipe off his shoes. He took out some polish and quickly applied some to the toe of each shoe. Using an old brush he got out of the top drawer, he brushed the shoes carefully. When he finished, the shoes shined expertly. It was always this way when he worked, never wasting a moment and not spending much time. Spring was in the air. Paul could smell it as he raised his head like a hound dog on the hunt. Even here in New York, a man could smell the freshness of spring. Some of the gutters still held dirty water from the ice that had melted long ago. The water didn't have anywhere to drain off to because the drains were still plugged from the trash of last fall. It was only down in the ghetto that a person encountered such neglect. Here, on 87th Street between Broadway and Amsterdam, the blacks, poor whites, and spics were trapped in their own private prison. Some would never rise up out of the poverty that surrounded them. The lucky ones would eventually earn enough money from selling drugs, or have the money their women would earn to leave. Yet most of them wouldn't move because they were frightened of the outside world. This was the only world they knew, the slums, with the hustlers and bums falling over each other. So they would live and die in their ghetto, afraid of the outside. Paul waved to the elderly black man who sold newspapers on the corner. The man waved back as Paul went by. Peddlers moved up and down the street, calling out at customers and friends alike, so that there was a constant cacophony of voices. A visitor touring through these parts would many times be lost and frightened by the strange sounds coming up from the bowels of the city. Paul reached the subway and ran down the steps quickly, taking two at a time.